What's up, guys? Happy Tuesday. Welcome back to another episode of Eat, Train, Prosper. Today is our monthly Instagram Q&A for the month of November. We have a stacked list of questions, mostly on the training side of things, but we have a couple on the nutrition side as well, including a very fun and I think really kind of conversation-provoking question directed towards Brian and I's coaching style and differences in food choices for the most part, I should say. But before we get into this, as always, Brian, kick us off with some updates.
Yeah, we're back to the Q&A episode. I love these, man. They're just so free-flowing and fun, and I love that we get to kind of jump around and hit a bunch of different topics. So for me, I'll be quick with my updates. I started my new mesocycle for myself on a Bees program, which is available on the Train Heroic app through Paragon. But on 11/14, I started my new meso, still a push-pull legs. And I mentioned on the last episode with Adam Neth that I had 4 to 6 different kind of movement swaps that I was going to put in. And I discussed specifically the kind of rear delt pull around movement where the arm would come across the body and you'd kind of sweep and pull almost like the start of a bow and arrow type thing, which lines up really well for the rear delt. But I tested that out along with a couple other variations. And ultimately, for a couple reasons, I decided on doing a bilateral rear delt pull down, which I didn't actually realize I could do in my setup. But since I bought that hammy strap, which acts as like a seatbelt essentially, I can now do like regular pull downs as if I had those pads that go over the knees. So I was super happy to discover that, because one of the things I'm trying to do this cycle is slightly less unilateral work. Like I do have a split squat and a single leg RDL and a one arm pull down. But I think aside from those 3, maybe a one arm lateral raise too. But okay, so four single limb movements. But I'm trying to do less single limb work in general because I find it just exhausting. To have to do double the work and hit double the amount of hard sets and all that sort of stuff. So I decided on the bilateral rear delt pull down. And in effect, what it kind of ends up looking like is your like typical wide grip pull down, with the just difference being that my grip actually starts a little narrower. So I get a little bit of narrow to wide pull as I go, which I think is even better for the rear delts, and probably takes the teres just a little bit out by not having that wide to narrow pull. It's more of the narrow to wide pull. Lines up super well for the rear delts. I get myself into thoracic extension, so I lean back, slight arch in the spine, and it's phenomenal, at least in the first kind of deload flow week where I tested it out. So excited to progress with that one. I was planning on doing a trap bar B stance RDL, but that just like the back of the trap bar kept hitting my back leg. I couldn't find a comfortable position for the back leg. And then I remembered how much I would get out of rear foot elevated RDLs. And so I also realized that I would be fine with my dumbbells up to 100 pounds doing a rear foot dumbbell RDL. I don't think I'll be able to do more than I think that 6 to 12 rep range is going to be super solid for the entire mesocycle for me. And I did one set in my deload week with 75 pounds per hand for 6 reps. It was probably like a 5 RIR, and my ass has been sore for like 3 days. So I know for sure that this is going to be an effective movement to add in. I think I'm just going to continue doing one set until that doesn't seem like enough anymore. But that's the updates on the program. My knee is in a week 8 after PRP now. And I think this is the first week where I actually feel like maybe it's better than it was before PRP. I've had this like insane tightness along the inside of my knee that we discussed on prior episodes. I think is the Pizanserine bursa is what was the diagnosis from the doctor. In getting some work on it with Nicole, she's a PT locally. She's awesome. Synapse, if you guys are local to Colorado. But she's been doing a lot of work on that kind of inner thigh area. And there's a lot of things that it could be, like the sartorius and the adductor and the semi-tendinosus, I think all kind of converge into that same area, like just below the medial side of the knee. So she just spent a bunch of time grinding it out and deep tissue stuff in there and doing some needling. And so I'm going to continue doing that. And hopefully I'll have some even more positive updates for you guys as we go on. The next thing is Physique 45 is a new program from Paragon that's dropping on December 5th. This is our solution to people that don't have 75 minutes to spend in the gym. And in preparing this program and writing the blog for it, I stumbled across a 2017 meta-analysis and systematic review from Schoenfeld and colleagues. And to be completely honest, I cherry-picked these quotes, and they were part of longer sentences. But for the sake of our argument, I think that they demonstrate a point that I'm trying to make with Physique 45, in that the majority of your gains from training come in the first set or two sets. And then everything after that is kind of this depreciating, almost asymptotal response, where the more you do, you might get more return on investment, but it's going to be depreciating. So there's a dose response relationship. And then, as you guys know, it's an upside down U curve as well, where you can do too much and then you actually start having worse results. So with those two things in mind, these two quotes are from that systematic review and meta-analysis. Clearly, substantial hypertrophic gains can be made using low volume protocols under 4 weekly sets per muscle group. Such an approach, therefore, represents a viable muscle building option. And then it went on to say, but not as much as, doing more sets, et cetera, et cetera. I didn't include that part of the quote. Then the next quote was, when considering a weekly sets as a binary predictor of less than 9 sets versus more than 9 sets, findings did not reach statistical significance between conditions. So, I mean, that's crazy. Like somewhere between, if under 4 sets can get you substantial hypertrophic benefits, and then under 9 or over 9 is non-significant, I think you can pretty confidently hang out in that like 5 to 9 sets per muscle group per week range on a general masses level and achieve the majority of the results that you're going to get. So what we did with Physique 45 is we kind of harnessed that. We included much more in intensity techniques. So we have more rest pause sets like partials. We're going to do reverse drop sets. We're going to prioritize more lengthened movements overall. We're eliminating calves and abs. So if that's something that you think is important to do, you can find 10 minutes on your own to do calves and abs. But if you only have 45 minutes of training, there's a lot more important stuff you can do there. And then the other final piece of Physique 45 is there's no specialty cycles or strength cycles, because you can't really, in 45 minutes, you can't work up to a 1 rep max on a back squat, something like that. Like that'll take you 45 minutes for some people. So it's basically the best solution we can create given the time period. And I would be surprised if people that dedicate super hard to those 45 minutes even notice any differences between the people that are putting in 75 minutes and doing calves and abs and doing periodization and all this stuff. So anyway, I think that's super cool. And I'm excited to implement that program for Paragon starting December 5th. And then I have one more update, but it kind of transitions us into the first question. So why don't we jump over your way, get some updates, and then we'll come back here.
Yeah, I have a couple follow-ups to the Physique 45. I think that's really, really cool. It's solving it's a solution to people who are like seriously significantly short on time. And then that was a follow-up question I was going to have, is like, because we're doing less sets, is it closer proximity to failure? Is there intensity techniques and different stuff? And I think that's really, really cool. I think personally, my training, I don't think it will ever go down to 45 minutes unless there's other weird, life circumstances. But I just prefer to train lower volume now, closer to failure, more intensity techniques. Like that's just what from a subjective feedback, I just would prefer to do like 2 hard sets of like rest pause or something like that, as opposed to like 4 sets to like a 2 RIR or 3 RIR or something like that. So I think that's a really, really cool solution you guys are putting out there.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I did the math in the blog on like what it would be if you did 3 sets of 15 with like normal rest periods, and you essentially get 15 effective reps if you're going to use the effective reps model, right? But you have to do 30 quote ineffective reps to get the 15 effective reps. And then I compared that to one set of 10 with 3 rest pause sets after. And in my example, I assumed you got 10 on the first set and then it went 5, 4, 3 on the rest pause sets. And if you do the math on that, you end up with 17 effective reps, and you have only 5 ineffective reps, which are the first 5 reps of the 10 rep set. So it's a significantly more time efficient approach to get even more effective reps. It's hard, obviously. Like 3 sets of 15 probably is subjectively easier than doing one hard set with 3 rest pause afterward. But I think that when you have 45 minutes, like, you know, if that's the way that you can meet your goals, then I think it's a super viable way of doing so.
Yeah, I think it can also, like, for people who have a hard time like keeping their head in the game in the gym, or if like okay, we have 3 sets of 15 with like 3 minutes of rest in between. If you're like someone who's just like, I'm going to get lost on Twitter or Instagram or something like that helps with that as well, because with those like rest pause sets, you need to be like, okay, I'm taking my 15 set. It like keeps your head in it, as opposed to like, well, I have 3 minutes to fuck around before my next set, sort of thing. So I think it's really, really cool.
Thanks, dude.
Updates on my end. So I guess by the time this episode releases, it will be the 22nd, which is going to be like right heading into the Thanksgiving holiday here in North America, United States. Let's put it that way. And with that comes like Black Friday and stuff. And I will have some sales going on my coaching products. None of my coaching services will be on sale. But the Done For You client check-in system, which you can find in the episode description, I think I'm going to do like 50% off sale on, as well as the muscle gain and fat loss models. So if you are a coach, these tools could be of great utility to you. There are 1,300 other coaches worldwide using them, serving thousands of clients all over the world. So if that interests you, take a look at that and get them on the cheap. That is the first one. And then I wrapped up a big consulting project to onboard an existing coach with an existing business into all of my systems and setup, which I was actually just describing, and then more. So that was like a really, really cool experience. It was kind of new for me, because there was parts like the Done For You client check-in system, the models that I would like sell and other coaches would use. But this was the first time that someone with an existing business, like I onboarded them onto all of my Straker Nutrition Co. tools. So that was really, really cool to do. He's fucking stoked about it. Tons of great feedback already. So it's cool to just see, like, I guess my impact of things that I never thought would turn into this, like, go to other places. So that was a cool kind of just like business, like check the box sort of thing.
Very cool.
On to some personal stuff. We talked a little bit offline, and I think I mentioned it last week, like very, very briefly. I am in my like inflammation and liver flush, like 2-week protocol, and it is crushing me. Brian and I were joking offline beforehand. So I'm on day 9. I have 5 days left to go. I've lost 9 pounds, so I'm literally losing like a pound a day. Yesterday is the first day that I was the same weight, 193 on both days. But the day before, I was down like 1.7 or something.
How many calories are you eating on this?
I'm doing like 2,700.
How are you? I mean, go into why you're losing weight on that amount of calories.
I do not know. So the premise of it is it's like all whole food, no alcohol, no caffeine, no dairy, no soy, no grain. It's basically like I'm doing a lot of fish, very low inflammation, low bloat vegetables like spinach, squash, sweet potatoes, quinoa, a lot of fruit. So I'm doing like loads of blueberries and strawberries, and then like fruit juices as well. So like organic unsweetened apple juice, pineapple juice, aloe vera juice, pomegranate juice. So I'm doing like a lot of juice. And the thing is, like, when you, and I generally don't talk or speak about things like this because I cannot explain it in detail. But I do firmly believe that like the calories in, calories out, not that it breaks down under certain circumstances, but it's not like always, your body doesn't respond equally. So like if I was eating these like 2,700 calories, but I was doing like, I don't know, like my typical Gatorade or breads or, like rotisserie chicken, different things, like I wouldn't be responding in this manner. And I don't know enough yet around the specifics of that, but I have just seen it enough. And here I'm on like literally day 9, and I'm doing it with my girlfriend, Jenny, and she's down like 3.5 pounds. She's obviously half the size of me, more or less. And it's wild. It's wild how much fat I'm intaking too. Like I'm being rather gratuitous with my coconut oil, my olive oil. I'm probably doing like 50 grams of olive oil a day and like another like 20 of straight coconut oil. And it's just like, doesn't fucking matter. It's crazy.
I think that my guess would be that has something to do with like the individuality of the response in the gut. And I even remember it was recently, I want to say it was Stronger by Science, but it may have been an article or study I was reviewing, but they were talking about how you can take an equal dose of fiber between two people, and you have some people that can break down that fiber and turn it into energy, and other people that cannot and just excrete it. So that in itself is a breakdown to the calories in, calories out piece, because we naturally just assume that fiber is indigestible and therefore doesn't count as calories, but it does for some people.
You're right. It is that is a recent Stronger by Science episode. I want to say it's the one. I can't remember. I was literally just listening to it the other day on the drive to the gym, and they were having that exact conversation. Maybe I really don't remember which one it was, unfortunately, but yeah, it's something I will just discover more about as I go. And then something that I'm going to do is get labs right after, or probably like the week after wrapping it up, to see some things. Cause there's always like some anomalies in my lab work that I'm always looking for. But yeah, it's been definitely pretty interesting, and just now a tool to use with like clients who are kind of like either non-responding or coming in with like glaring kind of functional health issues sort of thing. And I'm like, okay, we're going to start here, get inflammation down, dump some water weight sort of thing, and then get them some quick wins as well. So it's been fun learning more. The most interesting piece that I think is important is I've been exhausted on this, absolutely exhausted. Like, and it's how I know it's bad is like, I don't even want to go to the gym. Like when I don't want to go to the gym, I know that's when like stress is peaked the fuck out, and I need to like pull back in my commitments in life, or something is like energy levels are just bad. I pulled caffeine the week before. So I'm on like what would be whatever, like day like 18 or something like that without any caffeine. But I'm noticeably more tired just throughout the day. I'm just like literally like yawning, and I feel like I just want to take naps and stuff. Excuse me. And then the kicker is I'm sleeping incredibly well, which was another kind of like dagger in my caffeine thing. Cause like after like 5 or 6 days pulling the caffeine, I started sleeping like a king. So I might, but I do want to go back to having coffee because I just like it so much. I'm going to pull up that supplement that Jeremiah noted on when we had him on, and touch on that. I can't remember what it was called, like rutacarpine or something like that, which helps you like metabolize it faster. So that's been the upside, is I'm sleeping like really, really well. And I have a Garmin watch that tracks it. I'm sure it's not as good as like the Whoop or anything like that, but it's like duration, REM, deep sleep. It's not like, I'm not talking like a 5% difference. I'm talking like 50-fold increases and stuff
that's
like
insane.
that. Yeah. And I just feel it, like I'm typically someone, when I like wake up to pee in the middle of the night, like it could be 2:30 a.m. and I like wake up, I'm immediately thinking about work, and I could like start my day, whereas now I wake up to pee and I'm like a zombie holding onto the walls and stuff like that, because I'm like so tired. So it is nice to be sleeping good. And then hopefully I do get the energy slumps will start to fade as I'm wrapping up the last few days here.
Yeah. And
then I guess the last thing I have, I discovered one of my longtime clients, man, he's been with me for like 1.5 years now. We realized we're like 40 minutes from each other. So we're going to go lift some weights this weekend. I'm super, super pumped about that, just to meet in real life and lift some weights, maybe eat.
Where are you guys meeting?
I don't really know yet. So
Okay.
he's like down closer to Richmond, which Richmond's about maybe like 75 minutes from where I am now.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're gonna meet up and go do that.
Sweet. Sounds awesome, man. Love that you get
Yeah,
to meet up with clients and train.
yeah,
Sweet.
that's it for
Okay,
me.
cool. Well, so we have 20 questions and we only have 45 minutes. I doubt we're going to spend 2 minutes a question. So this is probably going to have to bleed over into the next episode. But starting us off, so my update, real quick, is my final update was that throughout my hedonistic excess of nutrition over the last few weeks, you could say, maybe months. I finally peaked at the high 190s in body weight, 198 and change. I might have seen 199 one day. But I basically went back to things being satisfied in my nutrition protocol instead of feeling like I'm overfed. It's more of like, hey, that was a pretty maintenance-y type day. And the body weight's already back down into the 195s. So it kind of like went up, came back down, lost some glycogen, the way things go. But I think this transitions us really well into the first question, which basically is asking about the different eating styles that we have. And I kind of expected this question probably sooner than we got it in what episode we're on, like 90 something in Eat, Train, Prosper, because we talk about this a lot and we do have very distinct styles of eating. The question goes on to basically say, palatable foods with more freedom for Brian and more rigid structure for Aaron. How have these approaches impacted how we thrive and how we coach? How has it impacted your physique? Do you want to start off with that one? Add any context that you want to add? I know that one of the things we discussed off air was that I don't tend to coach people on nutrition. So many of my, like I have coached people as part of their training package, but a lot of my perspective on this is going to be anecdotal through talking with people over 25 years in the industry, but also my own personal experience. So if you want to start with any of that, and then I can take it from there.
Yeah. So what I'll do is kind of frame the conversation that Brian had offline, and I think the root of the approaches is like, first and foremost, like I am a nutrition coach. That is my specialty. While I do training for some of my clients, and we talk training with a lot, like at the root of it, I am a nutrition coach. And then with Brian, kind of the opposite, right? He does some nutrition, he does some nutrition with some clients, but the majority of his training with clients is on the training side of things. And I think that in and of itself leads us to our styles a little bit more. I personally and anecdotally have found with clients, like the more muscle mass that you have, the kind of more you can get away with things. Brian is someone who has considerably, large amount of muscle mass. A lot of what I found is like clients who try and intuitively eat things or do like the satiated kind of fed things. A lot of people will not be able to handle that without the scale kind of creeping. And like Brian said, hey, I wrote things in a little bit subjectively and I dropped 4 pounds. I do not find that to be a very common thing with an overwhelming majority of the clients that come to you or come to me. The one thing last thing I'll kind of point out there before kicking it back over to Brian is it's rare that people reach out for nutrition coaching when things are going great, when they feel in control of their body composition and body weight and stuff. You're usually getting the problems. So that's, I think, a big part of it as well. But Brian, let's see what you have to say here.
Yeah, so I think the first thing to note is that I have had very rigid, strict stages of my journey over 25 years. I have not just eaten at will for my entire 25-year training journey. When I first started, the first few years, I was the most rigid, like over to the point where I should have been eating more food. Like I was 6 meals a day with like turkey and a fruit or a vegetable and a carbohydrate source. And that was like 6 meals a day. That's more or less what I ate. Or it was like the protein shake between meals type thing. And then your meals are the same thing that I basically said. So I would have been benefited by actually probably eating more crap in my earlier days just to put weight on, but I was a naturally going through a chunky stage when I started training. And so I always associated this idea of being lean as kind of my objective instead of this idea of being big. And that changes the way I think you eat in general too. So over time, I think the most important factor is kind of what Aaron said. Like, I just have enough muscle mass that I can get away with a lot of things, and combine that with the fact that I value my social interactions with my friends, and I like to have friends that aren't necessarily deep into the fitness scene like I am, because I think it expands me, it forces me out of my shell, and provides perspective on aspects of life that that aren't, what I deal with on a day-to-day basis with work and stuff like that. So I really like that. And I like the food and the drink that comes with it. Like, that adds value to my life. And at this point where we've discussed that I'm 25 years in, whether I'm making progress or not is, yes, maybe I'm making progress. Whether I optimize things and it goes at 0.25% progress, or I maybe do the way I'm doing it and it's 0.15% progress. Like, at the end of the day, the amount of progress I'm making is so small at this point that I'm just not willing to sacrifice things that I enjoy. Like I don't want to be 80 years old looking back and being like, man, I spent 25 years eating like these perfect foods and not having social experiences, and now I'm dying with no friends and I don't even know like what my favorite food is. I mean, not like that's obviously a very extreme example and not realistic, but it kind of is more or less the perspective that I take into this question. And so I always make sure that I hit my protein. There's never a day where I have less than 0.75 grams per pound of body weight. So 150 might be like the lowest number that I would have in a day. And then on top of that, I fill it in with the things I enjoy that provide some nutritional value. And it's also important to note two other things. That when I have these hedonistic excesses, that might be 3 to 5 days a week of this. And then I'll have 2 to 3 or 4 days where I'm eating in a deficit, eating much cleaner and offsetting these higher days that I'm having. So it's kind of this up and down oscillating thing. And then on a grander, more expanded level, I actually clean it up a lot 3 months a year when I go into my spring dieting phase. So I have these 9 months of excess that build me from the low 180s to the high 190s. And then it all gets cut off in a super healthy manner over the course of 3 months. And I've even discussed how sometimes I feel better in the first few months of my diet. I mean, not at the end, but in the first couple months, because I'm eating healthier, I'm cleaning up my habits, I'm putting better foods into my body and stuff like that. So I'm not trying to sit here and say that like everybody should be able to go out and eat whatever foods they want if it's important to them. I think that there is something that it's almost like I've earned that right via the muscle mass that I've put on, and my like glucose disposal and like all of these responses that are supposed to be inherently positive in your body, in your hormonal profile, they all work for me. Like, even when I eat like this and I do my blood work before my diet at my peak off-season body weight or whatever, my blood work doesn't look any worse than it does at the end of my diet. Like, they're all pretty similar. So my body just is pretty efficient, I think, at disposing of this stuff. And that may not be the case for everybody at this point.
You really, really did an incredible job of phrasing the different parts. There's a couple things that I want to touch on that you really, really said. They add value to your life, right? So like the social outings with friends, maybe that's pizza and beer, once a month or twice a month or something like that, or however much. You periodize your flexibility and freedom and planned hedonistic deviations throughout the course of your year with like your gaining. And then when you decide to go through a calorie deficit to get lean for summer because you find that it adds value to your life, you clean things up. And the thing that I thought was really, really interesting, and I find too, 100% is like inherently like dieting is unhealthy. I'm using air quotes here, but for myself, for you, and I know a lot of clients, like when you really clean up your diet and you're prioritizing like super lean cuts of meat, a lot more fruits and vegetables, like you feel really good until the calorie deficit like catches up to you. And that's more so just the total amount of, fuel you're giving yourself, not the food choices in and of itself. But that's always a really kind of trippy thing. You're like, dang, I feel pretty fucking good eating all these, fruits and vegetables and really quality food. And then you've just spent, you've been over rigid, over flexible, spent 25 years doing it. You found auto regulation that works like really, really well for you. And then the last thing I think that's important to wrap up on is, even at like the end of your planned hedonistic deviation, and when your body weight is peaking in the off season, you're still only at like 16, maybe 17% body fat max.
Yep.
And that's the big thing there. Like if you pushed it into like the 22s, 24s, like your health markers are probably not going to look like they do, but you do auto regulate really, really well. And I think that's where intuition is like really, really big. And that's the part that I think so many people lose sight of. Like if you only get to 15% body fat during your calorie deficit, and then your hedonistic deviations take you up to like 25%, that's a different story than what Brian is saying, specifically because of physiology and what's going on inside at those levels of body fat.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think most people probably couldn't eat like me and maintain like high teens body fat. Like most people eating like me for 9 months or whatever many period of time it is until my next diet would end up like ballooned up and like in relatively poor health. So that is important. And I think to put a bow on it, the thing that you mentioned about the periodization is not just that 3 months at the end of the year, but it's even in the week, like 3 or 4 days of eating crap and then 2 or 3 days of kind of reining it in. And like, I think that is huge in just maintaining things where my weight is traveling up slowly. Whereas if I just ate this way every day, my weight would clearly be like 20 pounds heavier than it is without those 2 or 3 deficit days along the way.
Exactly.
Yeah. Anything else to add on that?
I guess the only thing I would add is what I had found personally, because I guess we never really touched on mine. I had lived a life previously where I had a lot of planned deviation, a lot more typical social outings sort of thing, or where I was within like groups of friends and influenced there. And it wasn't until that, when I took Straker Nutrition Co. full time and kind of moved away from all of my family and friends and spent a lot more time by myself, that I found like what I actually valued outside of all my like social influences and stuff like that. And that's when I realized like, oh yeah, I don't really care about drinking alcohol anymore. And so I quit drinking. I don't really care about like eating pizza or cheat meals and stuff anymore. So I just stopped doing it. And that I found that like eating and living this way adds value to my life. Like the other things take value away from my life. I really value how good I feel. And when I do those things, I feel terrible. And I don't want to feel terrible. And I think what Brian and I are really getting to is like, you have to decide what adds value to your life and then what doesn't, and find that balance for yourself personally.
Yeah, that's really well said. Cool. All right. So the second question is session volume per body part. Literature suggests 8 to 10 sets as a max. This prescription seems to lack nuance. Example being back. If you did 3 sets of iliac lower lat pull downs, 3 sets of thoracic upper lat pull downs, 3 sets of upper back rows, and 3 sets of rear delt flies, it seems like maybe that's okay given how big the back is and the different regions, ? And I agree. Yeah, I think that certainly lacks nuance. Like that to me, like the back, like I would at least separate the back into like upper back and lats. That's kind of, and low back. Like I think low back would be a third region of the back. And I don't think you train low back as part of back. Like it's usually lats and upper back. So yeah, I think like if you did, I agree that it does lack nuance, but I also think that you would still probably be benefited by splitting those 12 sets into like 6 one day and 6 another day. Unless you're somebody that needs 24 sets a week for your back. And then maybe, it's 12 one session, 12 the next. Or if it recovers that quickly, maybe it's 9, 9 and 6 or, 9, 8, 7 or whatever that math comes out to get you to 24 sets. So I think there's a number of ways you can split that up. But I think, overriding the literature seems to show that as long as weekly volume is matched, it doesn't exactly matter too much how you split it up. If you're dealing with like the very end extremes of optimality, yeah, you'll probably have more energy for that work and be able to put more focus into it if it's on a different day. But I think that this example you put out is totally fine as well.
Yeah, I think it's important to realize that like the literature is going to report like population means and averages across the body. I think if we had like metas on like lat training versus like chest training and different things like that, there would probably be variations in it. But you have to take what you find is going to be best for yourself after experimenting. Like at this point in my training career, I'm going to take my intuition for myself over what any of the research says. Personally, that's just how I'm going to take my training. But I think the one thing I will say is, Brian, I think you will probably attest to this too. How good you are, or how efficient you are at making each set really targeted for a stimulus is important. Like the really good examples, like the unilateral pull down, supported pull down or whatever. If you gave me that when I was like 20 years old, I just would have like sat there and just yanked on it. And I could be like, do 4 sets with like 200 pounds, right? And I'm like, oh yeah, I kind of feel it, whatever. I probably need like more volume. As opposed to like today, I guarantee you, like I could get much more stimulus and hypertrophic stimulus out of two really targeted sets with probably 80 to 75% of the load that I would have used 14 years ago for more volume. And it's hard to quantify that like individuality into the literature.
Yeah. No, I fully agree. And I'm actually at a point now where I can't even really do more than 2 sets for a lift, like any lift, whatever that lift is. 2 sets is about as much as I get. And then it almost feels like it's kind of having like I'm on the other side of that U curve. Like it's like 2 sets gives me the stimulus that I want and like peaks it. And then that 3rd set almost takes me down the other side of the U curve. And it feels like I'm, losing pump, losing connection with the muscle, et cetera, et cetera. So with that in mind, like I've actually found now that the most I can do in a session for a muscle group is about 5 or 6 sets. So I have like my ham dominant day is 5 sets for hams, 3 for quads. And then the reverse for my quad dominant day is 5 for quads and 3 for hams. And when I do back as this like big collective thing, it's like 2 sets for one of the lat regions, 2 sets for one of the upper back rear delt regions, and then 1 set of another of one of those regions. So it's made like a different lat region or like a rear delt focus move or something like that. But 5 sets for my entire back, and then that will happen twice a week. So yeah, to Aaron's point, I just think if you can be super accurate and get a ton out of your training, you shouldn't need to do that much volume in a session.
Yep, agreed.
Cool. Next question is on our thoughts around using cuffs, which we've kind of touched on somewhat often in the last few episodes. The question is benefits and drawbacks. Is it vital to have something to grip with in the cuff, or can the cuff function effectively on the wrist without any gripping in the hand? The asker also referenced a time where he had bicep tendonitis and used the cuffs for all pulling movements and whether that's okay. And my thought is like, so Cass is really big on the idea of, hey, if you're going to use a cuff, make sure you have something in your hand to grip tactilely. It helps with a nervous system response, I believe. I've personally found that that's beneficial as well. That I when I do my lateral raises now with cuffs, I really like to hold the Cass handle at the end of my cuff. And when I do my tricep movements with the cuff, I put it all the way down. So it's essentially along my pinky. And then I kind of grip it like a bird would grip a tree branch with the outer part of my hand as I'm pushing away for the tricep stuff. And so I find that all to be better than if the cuff was directly on the hand, or rather on the wrist. And then the last thing I'll say about this is that if it is on the wrist, what I don't like about that the most, and this is beyond the tactile piece, is that it shortens the moment arm. And I feel like it actually feels less effective when that moment arm is a whole hand's length shorter. Like that's like, 6 to 9 inches, or I don't know, however big a hand is, 6 inches maybe. But that's that to me makes a huge difference. So anytime I'm even using cuffs, I always pull the cuff down. So it's essentially over like the top of my hand instead of on my wrist. And then I kind of curve my hand over so the cuff doesn't move back as I'm doing the movement. And that at least keeps the moment arm at a similar length to how it was. And I like that aspect of it.
I 100% agree with everything you said there. Anytime I'm using cuffs, I put like an MTD handle in my hand. It just feels more natural to me. Every time I've tried to do it without, I just like, what do I do? Do I hook grip? It just doesn't feel right to me. And I always go back to it. Anytime I like try not to, I always end up grabbing one there. I think what you said around the moment arm is it's as silly as it might sound, because it is literally inches. It does change it. I feel like whenever I'm doing lateral raises with the cuff, and maybe I have like a loose cuff and it kind of goes up my forearm ever so slightly, I feel like I'm like doing more of like a lift up as opposed to like the lateral raise, and that's because the moment arm is it's enough to make a significant difference in how I perform the movement. I think it's a worse performance of the movement. And then with having like the bicep tendonitis and using a cuff for pulling movements, like if that's how you're working around an injury, it's not going to be optimal, right? You're just trying to do what you can to keep some tension on the target tissues you want to. And something like that, I am someone who will get a lot of elbow flexor and extensor tendonitis, so either side of my elbow on my left arm. And that is why I really moved to using the VersaGrips for so much of things. And especially like almost any back movement or anything I'm holding something heavy, I'm pretty much using those. And that's really, really helped with that because I'm not like death gripping things anymore.
Yeah. And doing more cables in general, I think helps with that. But I agree fully with you that if you have bicep tendonitis and this is going to help you get humeral depression so you can work your back, like absolutely, I would 100% do that. Okay. Next question. Could you go more in depth about how you might take intuitive training, how you might make intuitive training a successful approach? So this may be on the heels of our conversation with Makoni, which we had on his channel, Brains and Gains, a couple weeks ago. But one of the things we were talking about is he proposed this question to us of, what do you guys think about that idea of just kind of going into the gym and just doing what you want for the day? And so we addressed it a little more in depth on there. I don't want to rehash everything, but I know your response was basically that you need a plan, that you don't feel right going in and not having like something on the agenda to do, right?
Yeah, because I feel like it just leaves you open to like some of your worst personal habits. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I know like if I do that, I'm going to train back a lot in quads, and I'm probably never going to do arms and I won't do abs. And it'll just like lead to a worse version of myself because I'll just like succumb to my bad habits and tendencies.
Yeah. I think if I were to implement this, I would have the same problem, not in the sense that I think I would go to bad habits and tendencies, but I think I would feel purposeless. Like I would kind of go into the gym and just be like, almost like a nihilistic. Like, what's the point? Like if I can just go in and do whatever I want and not even try to beat the logbook or anything, like what the fuck is the point? Why am I even here? So what I think would be the best implementation of intuitive training for an advanced person would probably be that you have one movement per day where you go in and that's your like defining metric movement where you try to progress and you put in your effort and you follow some sort of predetermined progression plan for that movement. And then your other movements that follow while they're intuitive, they support that main movement. So that might be like you have a back and bicep day. And so everything that follows your wide grip pull down, which maybe is your metric movement, everything is meant to support that movement. And so whatever order you do it in, or how hard you work, or whether you use rest pause sets or whatever, like at least you have an objective of, hey, these movements are meant to improve my performance, execution, response on the said first movement. And it would be the same way across all muscle groups. Like, hey, this is my day for quads. I'm going to do a pendulum squat, and then I can do leg extension, sissy squats, dumbbell split squats, whatever it is. It's going to help support my pendulum squat. And so for me, I think that would be the way it would have to be implemented. And I think that could actually work because it gives me direction, but it also gives me freedom. And so I like that aspect of it.
Yeah, the one thing I wanted to add that you brought up is I think if you're going like, maybe you're like right now, right? I'm doing this flush thing. My body weight's down. My energy levels are down. Last week I tried to like stick to my programming. I just got crushed. I was dropping, like I'm working low rep ranges, like 7 to 9 reps. I was losing like 2 to 3 reps over the week before on like a set of 8. Like that's bad.
Wow.
That's a notable drop off. And for me, like that just fucks with me. I'm like, I'm just getting my ass kicked and I don't want to be here, sort of thing. So this week I have been, and at the end of last week, took just a more intuitive approach. I'm like, hey, I'm not making progress this week. I know that. I just want to not take a straight up 2-week ghost from the gym deload. I'm going to go in, I'm going to do a couple rest pause sets, get a pump, and just like check the box that I'm in here and working, sort of thing. And I think if you're ever going through a period where maybe you're in between programs, or you like, I don't know, you're moving coming up, or you're in some like very atypical period and you just want to get in and get things going. Like I think a more intuitive approach to that of like, I'm just going to get in, maybe use some intensity techniques because I don't have as much time and I just want to get a pump and keep some tension on the musculature so I don't atrophy. Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think I would do well. Like there used to be old bodybuilders that would write articles for T Nation, and even before that in the muscle magazines, that would say things like, I don't have a plan. I just like whatever muscle's not sore, I just train it. And that sort of thing is like I would just not do well with that at all. Like I'd be training back and lateral delts like every day. And it's just like, I don't know. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
Okay. So next question. Hey, Brian, love your YouTube shorts. Hey, that's awesome because I just post shorts of me working out. Can you discuss whether shrugs are a good choice for the upper traps? Some say it isn't optimal. So Paul Carter, I think, is the big voice right now that's saying that upper traps don't respond to vertical shrugs. And what's interesting is that Paul Carter also has been on like a tirade recently to correct what he believes was an incorrect statement years ago that the lats should be trained in the sagittal plane. So he just made a post yesterday being like, wide grip pull downs are just as much lats as, one arm iliac pull downs or whatever the comparison was. And so I feel like this is really just representative of the way that things change in the industry. And like mechanistically, dude, if you lift your shoulders up, like your upper traps are working. I don't really understand like it's all going to come back around. And like 2 years from now, everyone's going to be like, yeah, upper traps like that. You shrug up and the upper traps work. To me, I think if you want big traps, you should probably train them vertically. You should probably do some at like a 45-degree angle, whether it's like prone over a bench or, bent over or whatever. You should probably do some of those too. And then you should do a whole bunch of rowing movements and stuff for like your lower and mid traps. So I believe that raising your shoulders to your ears works your upper traps. And I don't think that I can really be convinced that that's not the case.
I don't really have anything to say on it is an optimal sort of thing, but I think if traps are something that you really desire, like pull heavy off the floor and maybe change your training style. Like show me a decently lean power lifter who doesn't have massive traps and rhomboids, like absolutely massive. They're not doing power shrugs and shit like that. Like they're just deadlifting heavy off the floor sort of thing. So that what I would say is like, if that is your goal, just run like a power building cycle for 4 months or something like that, and you're probably going to get much more out of that than you would adding shrugs once per week.
Yeah, totally agree. Okay. Better to always run mechanical tension mesocycles with deloads or implement different stimuli. So this kind of comes back to the way that N1 generally does things, where they tend to not have like a typical deload where you just decrease effort and volume. Instead, they generally will jump you out to a different stimuli. So if you're doing hypertrophy for 4 to 8 weeks, whatever it is, instead of deloading, they basically would be like, okay, we're going to do a strength phase for 2 weeks, or we're going to do a metabolic phase for 2 weeks, and then we're just going to jump right back into hypertrophy. There was an entire podcast on the Revive Stronger where Cass and Dr. Mike talked about the benefits and drawbacks to these different approaches. Personally, I don't believe that the literature is super confident at this point that there's benefits to periodizing in that manner. But I think that, like anything, the psychological side is just as important as the physiological. And so for certain people with specific neurotypes, like, you probably can't just go into the gym and do hypertrophy all the time. And you may find that doing short strength phases and short metabolic phases to kind of switch things up is something that is really good for you mentally. And the opportunity cost of doing so is basically nil. Like, it may help you move forward, and it might help you either increase neural adaptations via a strength cycle, or increase metabolic processing and work capacity through the metabolic phase, or it might not. But it's not like you're going to have worse hypertrophy because you did a 2-week strength phase or a 2-week metabolic phase instead of a deload and then right back into hypertrophy. So I think over time, skewing to the one that fits your personality best probably is going to be the best one for you.
I don't think I could add anything else better onto the back of one. I think what you said around the psychology is perfect there.
Cool. The next question, I think you are going to be the one that has to respond to this, but do you have a vegetarian recipe book that you'd recommend to increase protein intake?
I do not.
Okay.
I do not work with vegetarian or vegan clients. I've had very few in the past. One was very, very successful. The other were not. It's if you're coming to Brian and I for vegan or vegetarian stuff, you're coming to two not great people. What I would say there is your best bets here are obviously like, okay, I do have some things for you. NutriKey is a company that makes a protein powder called V-Pro, V-Pro. That is probably one of the best vegan protein powders on the market. It has a very, very high protein content. It's a pea blend, amaranth, rice protein, different ones there. Very, very limited ingredient set. I do really like that. I will actually order that protein and split about 50-50 with whey with that. I do really like that one. Your best bets for higher protein sources are going to be like your legumes, beans, chickpeas, lentils, I think are going to be one of the best. Some of the other like sprouts and different things like that. That being said, these are carbohydrate sources that are traditionally higher in protein than other non-higher protein carbohydrate sources, but these are not primary protein sources. And that's the hardest thing here is anytime that you are increasing your protein intake as a vegan or a vegetarian, you are doing so at the expense of also increasing your carbohydrate intake. If you're trying to gain, that's fantastic. When you're trying to go through a calorie deficit, it does provide a little bit of a complicated situation.
Yeah. I would just suggest possibly contacting Eric Trexler from the Stronger by Science group, because he just recently switched to a vegetarian diet for moral reasons. Because it's funny, he actually had an entire tirade and a whole episode against what was the movie on Netflix that everyone was
Game
big on?
Changers.
Game Changers. Yeah, he did like an entire 2-hour episode breaking down Game Changers and how it's wrong. But now he's essentially become vegetarian for moral reasons, not for physiological reasons. But I would contact him because I'm sure he's figured out ways to make it the most productive.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
there's people who do it too. It's just
Yeah.
I'm just not well versed in it.
For sure. So we're going to do 3 more questions, and then we'll save the next 10 for next week.
Yep.
Cool. All right. This question was for me. Why did I drop RDLs from my programming originally? And so I've touched on this back in, I want to say July. I cut RDLs out of my program for the first time pretty much ever. Like I've either deadlifted or had RDLs for eternity. And there's a couple reasons. One, I think the main impetus was that I tore my plantar fascia in June. And when I was doing RDLs after tearing the plantar fascia, I couldn't put the proper amount of pressure through my big toe on my right foot. And so I was kind of externally rotating my feet, or my one foot, my right foot. And I would get these like minor tweaks in my back almost every second or third time I would do RDLs. And it wasn't huge or completely debilitating, but it was enough where I'm like, why am I doing a movement that kind of creates aggravation? And so that was the main reason. And then I had PRP in my knee 8 weeks ago. And that was another reason why I didn't want to do RDLs, because it was going to essentially, again, create an instability and a compensation mechanism and things like that. And my low back, I would say, of all the areas of my body that tend to be aggravated by training, my low back is probably the most sensitive. So I just have to be a little bit careful and cautious of that. And so like now I'm adding RDLs back in, but I'm doing it with a B stance because that allows me to focus on each or rather with a rear foot elevation, because that allows me to focus on each leg individually. And I think that that's going to be better for the long-term stability of my low back. But I'm sure that I will be back to doing RDLs with a barbell or a trap bar at some point in the future. I just like at this point, my back feels great. I haven't had any flare-ups or anything since I took the RDLs out, and that's been really cool. So I just kind of want to ride that wave a little longer. Anything to add to that?
I would just say, like, if you're feeling like beat up in training and you kind of don't want to do like the full due diligence of like going to see a PT or getting work done regularly, or not rolling out, but like doing your soft tissue, mobilizations and sort of things, like that's probably one of the easiest things that you can pull that will stop or not stop, but like relieve some pressure on your body. I mean, it's not technically actually loaded, but you're loading through the spine. It's a lot on the hips, the bracing. Like I know for me personally, like today's a day I'm supposed to do RDLs. Like, and I woke up, looked at my gym thing, and I'm like, there's no fucking way I'm doing my RDLs today. Like, it's just taxing, it's like taxing, like a back squat is taxing sort of thing. And I think if you're just kind of beat up, it's a really simple, like, hey, I'm going to swap this, right? I'm adding the B stance 1s and 2. You're effectively training the same thing, but you can use significantly less load. You don't have to rely on such a comprehensive core brace to perform the movement. You get half the load. So that's something that I would say. They're great, but there is like a cost to performing them. And sometimes it can be beneficial to just pull that for a little bit.
Yeah, they cause me a ton of fatigue. Like I can even feel it over the next couple of days too. Like just that whole CNS thing, if you want to say that, like your just system feels kind of beat down for a couple of days after. And so I've been feeling great without them. And I think I'm going to keep it that way for a little bit. Okay. Next question. For lengthened partials only sets, do you use a percentage of weight, and for how many reps? I love this question because this is something I incorporate into my training a lot. So what I've been doing with my lengthened only sets is first I'll do a full range of motion set. So say my rep range is 6 to 10, I'll do a full range of motion set to whatever the RIR is for the week. If it's a short overload movement, it's going to be somewhere between 0 and 2. And after I do that full range of motion set, say I get 160 pounds for 8 reps, 160 for 8 short overload movement. I'll rest normal 2 to 3 minutes, and then I'll usually add 20 to 30% weight to that. It depends on the movement and exactly where the overload takes place, because some movements are like short mid bias and some are just really, really short bias. And for the ones that are really, really short bias, you can increase the weight probably 30%. But for something that's like short mid bias, I usually err more on the side of 20%. And an example there is like a cable row. I feel like I always add 30%. Like I can still get short for a rep with 30% more. But on a T-bar row, I always add 20% because if I do 30%, I can't even get a full rep with that weight after my short set. So basically, say I'm doing 160 for 8 and say I add 20%, then now that's 32 pounds that I'm adding to 160. So it would be 192. And I would basically try to match the reps that I achieved on the full range of motion set. And that lengthened set might have 1 or 2 full reps. Say I get 2, then I would do 6 max effort partial reps to get me to that 8 rep number. And then something else that I'm considering adding in after I DM'd Eric Helms, not to name drop or anything, but I DM'd Helms after he was on the Revive Stronger episode to ask him about what he was saying about essentially choosing a range of motion that is not full range of motion and then making that your full range of motion. So essentially you'd look at like something like a row and be like, hey, 60% range of motion is my full range of motion. And then you're just going to basically hit your desired RIR of that range of motion. So I wouldn't necessarily see range of motion drop off. It would be as if like, hey, I'm targeting one RIR of 60% of the range of motion. So as soon as I could no longer get the range of motion that was established as the range of motion, then that set is over. And so that's a different way of implementing it that I haven't done yet. I really like my way. So I've been hesitant to implement that. But I do think that to his point, what he said in his response to me was basically that way that he's talking about allows you to still use RIR with your lengthened sets. Whereas my way is essentially everything's failure because you're like, okay, I'm pulling as hard as I can, then I'm pulling as hard as I can again, then I'm pulling as hard as I can again. And that range of motion is falling off because you can't pull as hard anymore. So you're essentially at or past failure. And Eric Helms being the guy that he is, really, really enjoys his RIR. And so I think in his mind, the way that he's talking about it makes more sense and it's maybe something worth experimenting with.
Yeah, it's like my initial thought, I'm like, it's almost silly. It's like we're taking a past failure set, right? And now we're like adding RIR to it.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just a different range of motion, essentially.
Yeah.
It's like how if you do an iliac lat pull down, you don't pull your elbow all the way behind your body. That in itself is kind of a partial range of motion movement, even at the start. And so it's kind of implementing that same idea into like other movements, which I think makes sense.
Yeah.
All right. Final question. Actually, shit, man, we're already on time, and this question is going to take a little while. So let's save this one for next episode, and we'll have 11 questions next week.
Perfect. Yeah, let's do it. As always, guys, thank you for listening. Brian and I will be back next week answering the rest of these questions for the November Q&A.